My name's Zach, and this is Wanderlust Wandering. I'm someone who loves getting outdoors, loves trying out all sorts of gear and equipment, and also thinking deeply about things. I'm currently planning and preparing for a 1,200 kilometre hike along the Heysen Trail in South Australia. And as I prepare, I want to share with you some of my thought process and how I go about deciding what to take with me. And along the way, I'm going to share some tips and some advice which hopefully gets you inspired for your next adventure. Today, I'm going to talk about shelter systems. This is what keeps you safe from the elements and from wildlife, especially bugs. I've got 4 different setups here that I'm going to talk through, some of the pros and cons. I'll set them up, give you a look, and hopefully help you decide what you want to take on your next big adventure. So, let's get started. Here with me are 4 of the main setups you're likely to find, and specifically 4 that I've used, have a bunch of experience with, that I'm going to chat with you about, share you some of the pros and cons, and I'll talk through them one by one and then give you a bit of an overall of my general opinion. So, over here we've got a nice simple tarp setup. Over here is a hammock setup with all the various bits and pieces. Here is a freestanding tent, or technically semi-freestanding, but I'll talk about that once I actually put it up. And then a non-freestanding tent, which uses my walking poles as its structure. As I go, I'm going to time myself setting it up, and hopefully you'll then get a bit of an idea of how fiddly it is, whether it's something you want to be doing in the field, and how well you think it would work for you. So, with that said, let's start over here with our lovely tarp setup. Alright, so the first thing I should make note of with the tarp setup is that it's super versatile and there's a million ways to set it up. I'm gonna go with 1 tree and then 1 pole, which the brand that I've got just happens to come with 1 pole, to give you an idea of a couple different ways to set it up. But bear in mind, there's plenty of other ways. If you look up on YouTube tarpology, you'll see a million insane ways to set up the tarp. But we'll see how well I go. Alright, so got my tarp in its bag, got my position to get going started, got the time ready. We'll see how long it takes. And I'm started. That was good timing though, because I'm done with 7 minutes 24 seconds. Alright, now that the tarp's set up, let's take a tour and I'll explain what I really like and some of the things I like less about this setup. So, the first thing that I really like is you can set it up just about anywhere. I always bring hiking poles with me on journeys, so you could replace that pole over there with a hiking pole easily. You could have one on either side, or you can go between two trees. The other thing is its versatility. So at the moment, I've got it quite sharp. Words. I've got quite a sharp angle on that side, so if the wind was coming from that end, I could even drop down the part by the tree even more to get the wind protected there, and then keep this side nice and open, which then allows a little bit of a breeze without the heavy wind, and also just makes the view nicer. Down under here, I've just got a ground sheet to keep myself dry and my mat and sleeping bag dry from the ground itself. You can use just about anything. This is an old tent footprint, so it's actually designed to go underneath a more normal tent. But one of the things I love most about this is just how open it is. So you come in, you have a sit, and straight while you're still in bed, in your sleeping bag, nice and warm, you look across and you see, at the moment, a view of the rest of the park, but this could easily be a fantastic vista with a gorgeous sunrise as the first thing you wake up to. Pretty good. Alright. Try to set that up down there. Now, one of the things I like a little bit less about this setup is it is a little bit fiddly because there's no one way to set it up properly. Sometimes it requires a bit of thinking to figure out the best way to set it up for where you are and what's around you. The other thing is there's no bug protection by itself. So if I want to make sure that I'm free from bugs, I need to buy a separate bug net and string that up separately, which is not a huge issue. It's just another thing to consider that you're doing separately. The other thing, because it is more open, if the ground is really muddy or you're not in a great spot, sometimes it can be hard to get just the right setup so that you're truly protected from the elements if the wind is blowing hard, so then rain's coming in sideways. It can take a little bit more fitter work. The plus side though is it's super light. If you don't take the pole like I do and you just have your trekking poles, then it's just whatever tarp you've got. You can get them super lightweight. They can pack down to just about nothing, and it is genuinely one of the lightest ways to go camping, which if you're hiking long distances like I'm about to, is definitely a big plus. So that's the tarp setup. Now we'll move on to the next one. Alright, next thing we've got is our hammock setup. Now, funny story, I was originally going to set it up at the trees by the tarp, but after starting to set it up, I realized that the trees were too big, so my straps didn't actually help to fit because they weren't long enough. Which is a good example of my first point of hammocks to consider, which is how good are the trees, and you're going to spend a lot of time thinking about trees. But I've got a new spot, should work fine. Let's see how long it takes. Timer is started. 11 minutes. Alright, so same as before, now that we're set up, I'll give you the tour and tell you what I like and dislike. So, first thing that should be noted is just like with the Tarp Setup, there's heaps of different brands, different designs for them. This one is the Crewer Outdoors Koala, and you can see it's got a tarp. At the top is your actual shelter, and then as you come in here, hopefully it's adjusted to the dark well enough, you've got your actual hammock. Now, this one stays nice and wide because it's got these wonderful bars there. Not all of them do. I've got the bug net there. This one, it's got clips, so I could set up another line up there to hold it up a bit higher. But basically then, it's a bit hard with one hand. Let's come inside here. You grab a seat, start sitting down. So, first thing I really like about hammocks is they are very comfortable. It is genuinely one of the best night's sleep I've had is in a hammock. There's a few different designs, like I said, but one of the caveats to that is in order to get that good night's sleep, you've got to know a bit about what you're doing. You've got to make sure that you've got it hanging at the right angle so that all the sides aren't squishing in on you or you're not too banana shaped. And it takes a little bit of practice to see what works best for you. If you don't have the poles, there's a technique that you kind of lie at an angle as opposed to straight on. There's all sorts of designs like that. If you've got your hammock with you and it's a really nice day and you don't have far to trek, you can always just set up the hammock during the day, have your lunch in a hammock or chill out for a bit of siesta before moving on, which is always a fantastic option. Mind the grumbles as I figure out how the English language works. Now, the other thing, same as the Tarp Setup, you've got a lovely view to look at everything with when you go to bed or wake up in the morning. Great comfy position to watch a sunrise. I'm a big fan of being as comfy as possible if I'm ever up early enough for a sunrise. I don't want to work too hard for it. Now, some of the cons. Firstly, you need trees. So, it's super location specific. If you know that you're hiking in a forest, you probably don't have to worry about whether or not you're going to find trees. If you're hiking in a desert, hammock may not be the best idea. But it's not the end of the world if there are no trees, because then you're just back to your tarp setup, as I showed you before, with a million ways to set up. Depending on what material your hammock is, you can use that as your ground sheet. So then you've got the exact same weight that you have for the tarp setup, which is super light, but you can use it whether there's trees or not. Just depends on whether you get fantastic hanging feeling night's sleep or lying on the ground. The other amazing thing is if you do have those two trees, you don't have to worry about the ground. You'll probably notice we've got bushes over there, the ground's super rocky, super uneven, muddy in places, but none of that matters because I'm hanging above it all, just chilling. So, those are some of the things to consider with a hammock. I really like them, but because they're a bit fiddly, I generally prefer them if I know I'm going to be staying at a particular spot for more than one night, because then it makes it worth the extra effort of setting up and then packing down. But before I get too comfy and fall asleep in this hammock, let's move on to the next thing. Alright, so now we're going to talk about tents. There's two main differences that I'm going to talk about and show examples of. First one being a freestanding tent. which basically just means it has its own poles that holds the structure so that it stays in one piece with everything that you've got with you. This one is the Nemo Obi Elite one person. It's an older model, so if you go looking, it'll probably look a bit different. But I'll put it up and then bore you with all the details about it. And timer is on. In 5 minutes, 20 seconds. Alright, so now that we're done, let's have a tour of our tent. Now, first thing I love about tents, especially freestanding tents, is how simple they are. You get to camp and you just go, okay, what's the flattest spot that's good for sleeping? And then you set it up, the poles are there, you set it up exactly the same way every single time. You don't have to think about exactly where the wind's coming from, or if there's a better angle, any of that. Now, I should mention that this is technically only a semi-freestanding tent, because it does need pegs, I should say, on this side and over here to hold the thing out. A true freestanding tent has the whole structure set up with the poles, so that even if you're on super rocky ground and you can't get pegs in, it'll still stay where it is as long as you've got some weight in it. So you put your stuff in, don't even have to worry about pegging it out. This isn't quite that, because otherwise this whole thing would flap around if it didn't have the peg, so it's only a semi-freestanding tent. Now, we open up this lovely door here, and we can tuck that out of the way. Let's see how good I am one-handed. Got this little toggle that I slip and mind the camera as I go way too close, and toggle over like that, and that way you've got a nice view. And open up the door, and here's your inside space. The other thing I love about tents is once it's set up, all your waterproofing and the bug nest is all set. You've got your little room that's all ready to go. This, being a one-man ultralight hiking tent, doesn't have a lot of space. There's basically just enough room for your sleeping mat, which, if you're hiking, is not that big a deal, because I'm probably not going to be spending a whole lot of time inside my tent while I'm on the Heysen, and I'm going to be unconscious most of the time. So the extra space isn't the biggest deal. The main issue there is it just means that all my stuff in my pack I need to keep out here under the rainfly, but it can't be in here with me, so then it's not overly accessible. This one, super light, super tiny. So pros and cons for both of those things, but the simplicity really gives it the plus that you just get to camp. I can set it up in 5 minutes. I've got everything ready to go. So, now that that's done, let's go on to the last one, our non-freestanding tent. So, this is Zach now editing all the footage, and it turns out that the footage of me actually setting up the non-freestanding tent has been corrupted because the camera started to overheat at one point while I was filming. So, that means you won't get a lovely sped up footage with some beautiful music to go behind it, and you'll just have to take my word for it that I did manage it in 4 minutes 58 seconds. With that news out of the way, let's go straight to the tour. Alright, tent is set up, so let's have a tour and talk about it. Now, I did manage to set this one up in less time than the other tent, so this one is equally simple as the non-freestanding tent. The other thing I love about it is for basically the same weight, as long as you don't include the hiking poles, which I take with me anyway, then this is almost the same weight as this, but as you can see, you've got way more space. So, we come around. The other thing I really like about this one is, this one specifically, you can set up, it works by setting up the outer first. So that means all your rainproof stuff you're setting up before you set up the inside, which you don't want getting wet, which is not true of my freestanding tent. That one, if it's raining, I just have to be really quick and try to get things to be as little wet as possible. I don't have that issue with this one. So, we come along here, same as the other one. If I want, I can open it up so that I've got plenty of view. Just tighten that. So, if I know that it's not going to be raining and it's not going to be too cold that night, I can leave that open, get a beautiful view as I wake up and go to bed. Which, if you haven't noticed by now, I really like good views. So, open that one up. There's heaps of space in this area, so I can keep my pack and everything in here out of my sleeping area, but there's also plenty of space in here. So this one is a 2-person tent, so it's designed with 2 people in mind, but it's light enough that I have no issue whatsoever with using it for just me. Set you up there. This tripod cooperates. And here's the tent. As you can see, I've got plenty of headroom. I'm kneeling. It's nice and long enough. Whoops! Long enough. I'm currently not touching anything. I've got room out here. If I go somewhat diagonal, you can see I can spread out quite nicely. There's nice pockets in here. All in all, this tent is perfect for hunkering down. If I'm having a rest day, or if the weather's just really bad, or I'm just feeling a bit tired and I don't really want to go anywhere, I've got enough space in here to not go out of my mind like in that little 1-person tent that I showed you earlier. I've got space to spread out my things. There's even little hooks there, so with a bit of string I can easily set up a bit of a drying line so I can keep wet clothes or wet socks hanging to dry even while it's currently raining, which is perfect for hiking in winter like I'm going to be doing. And all in all, I don't have a lot bad to say about this one. It does take up a fair bit of space, and because of that, it means you've got to look at the ground a bit more closely, especially with this one. Because it's so lightweight, the floor is quite thin, so if I take it, I'll probably get a ground sheet to go under it as well, just for that added layer of protection from little thorns and sticks and what have you. And it means you got to be looking at a big enough area that's flat enough that you can lie down in, which you need to do for basically all tents. You just need to make sure that where you're sleeping, you don't end up with a rock in your back the whole night, because that gets old really fast. So, that's the drop X-Mid 2-person. Let's get out of here and discuss shelter systems in general. So, now that we've gone through each of the different systems that I've got, talked a little bit about them, let's talk in general. Which tent or shelter should you buy? Which one am I going to take with me on the Heysen Trail? Well, the first thing that you've got to figure out is where are you going and what are the conditions going to be like. So, if you know that you're going somewhere where there's not going to be a lot of trees, you can rule out the hammock setup pretty quickly. For the Heysen Trail, I'm only going to get trees good enough for hammocking probably about a quarter of the time, maybe even less. So, that one's off the list pretty quickly. Second, with the weather, is how gusty, how rainy is it likely to be the whole time, and how familiar are you with the setup you've got. So, for example, this tarp here, I love the tarp setup. I also really like fiddling with things, and I like knots, so it's right up my alley to use it. But if you're not good at that, the last place you want to be learning how to tie a knot and how to set up a tarp properly is while you're out in the middle of nowhere with freezing cold sleet and rain coming at you sideways. So, that's another big thing to consider. For me, I know that I'm going to be in quite a few spots where the ground's quite rocky, so it'll be a bit hard to get pegs in. And also, if I'm going to be hiking long distances, at the end of the day, I don't particularly feel like fiddling around too much with all the different bits and pieces, as much as I normally enjoy that. So, that's the tarp off of my list for the Heysen. But, for other camps, this is absolutely what I love doing. Gives me a little fun activity while I'm at camp to set it up just right so that I get the perfect view with the perfect amount of shelter. So, that then leaves us with our tents, which heaps of options. I've just shown you two basic ones, but simplicity is a big one. The weight, cost is a really big thing for you to think about. Generally, the smaller and lighter something is, the more it's going to end up costing you. If you want things to be cheap and also super light, tarp setups, perfect. You can add bits and pieces to them, get them as fancy as you want, keep them as simple as you need, whatever works best for you. For me, I've already got two tents, so I'm going to be deciding between them. Now, I am going for a long distance hike, so I want my tent to be my home and my safe space. I know that I'm going to be hiking during winter, so that means there's a fairly good chance that I'll end up in a few rainstorms and have some not great conditions. So I want somewhere that I'm going to enjoy spending time in if I end up with a rest day or just decide to end up being stuck in my tent to avoid howling wind and rain. That then for me rules out my little one-person freestanding tent, but for other people, they've already got two-person freestanding tents that work perfectly. For me, the Dan Durston tent, the X-Mid, is perfect. Super lightweight, packs down small. It uses trekking poles, which I've already got, which gives them a double use, which is amazing for ultralight hiking. Anything that you can get more than one use out of in terms of what you're doing with it is always a plus. So for me, on this hike, I'm going to be going with that drop X-Mid two-person tent. But for you, hopefully that's given you an idea of some of the things to think about, some other bits and pieces. I I'm now rambling, so I'm going to pause and get back to you. So the 2-man tent, the non-freestanding, is the one that I'm going to be taking with me, but hopefully I've given you guys something to think about and given you some inspiration or ideas maybe. My biggest piece of advice if you're just starting out is figure out your budget and work within that budget. Also, places like Gumtree, Facebook Marketplace are your friend. My biggest tip, if you're starting out and you're not sure whether you want to do some hikes or not, find whatever is cheapest, find something that works, get out there and take it from there. If you figure out that you get there and the thing you hate most about long distance hikes is how awkward the tent is, then you know this is probably a good idea to get a new tent, but this activity is great, rather than forking out $600 for a fancy tent and then realizing, actually I don't like hiking because I don't like hiking. Then you're just down $600. So that's the end of this video. Hopefully I've given you some solid ideas and inspiration. Now you know what tent I'm going to be taking with me on the Heysen Trail. Please, if you're interested in finding out any more, follow the links that I'll have below in the description, and keep updated as I keep sharing more videos with my planning and then some diaries of the trip itself. And you can see the link to the fundraiser, which is for a really good cause that I'm super passionate about and excited for. And apart from that, hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.